Welcome to Brandon Hall Group's HCMx Radio, the only podcast in the HCM arena that weaves current market research, HR technology, and industry leaders into each episode. Our HCMx Radio host is our Chief Operating Officer and Principal HCM Analyst, Rachel Cook.
Hi, this is Rachel Cook. I'm with Brandon Hall Group, and I am the host of HCMx Radio. And with me today, I'm excited to be talking with Glenn Scott, the Senior Manager, Advisory Services and Performance Improvement at Ernst & Young. Welcome, Glenn.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening for everyone, depending on where they are listening in from. And Glenn, you're in California, and you're just now returning back to on site with a client. So it's exciting. We've been talking a lot about over the last couple of months when we all started to work from home. You and I had a lot of conversations about what that's going to look like. And EY had created this framework around return to work reimagined. So you're kind of living through it right now. We're going to talk about that a little bit, of what it's like to go back into the office. And I as well just started going back to the office this week a little bit. So it's interesting. It feels good to be out again. And with that, there's still some uncertainty, of course, of what to expect and what's the near future going to look like. But it's an interesting time for everyone. And Glenn, can you, before we start talking about your experience, it would be great for our listeners to get to know you a little bit better. Can you share a little bit about your background?
Definitely, Rachel. Thanks for having me. So I'm a senior manager in performance improvement with EY. Before EY, I worked in industry in a number of years in both operations and HR roles with Procter & Gamble and a few other companies. So as you mentioned, I'm currently supporting an essential food business in California, and we're doing a mix of continuous improvement methodologies as well as some human capital management techniques. So these folks are great. They've been working through the crisis, and I think, as you mentioned, as I return to work, I'm learning a lot from them in terms of how they've managed, their work, their families. They make a very recognizable brand name product and are very proud of it. So I would say, being back at work, this is week 3 for me. It's certainly different in a lot of ways. And as we've talked a bit, I think it's not just returning to work, but it's also starting to think about how will work be different from this point forward. Do I need to be on site every day, every other day? If there is an outbreak, God forbid, what do we do? All of that isn't just, a framework on a page. I think it's real life in terms of how I myself came back to work physically 3 weeks ago.
And what is it like to be back at work, to be around people, to have to also, follow certain guidelines for safety? How is that like now in real time?
Yeah, it's a little awkward, quite frankly, because, particularly if you've ever worked in a production plant or in any HR job, I think a lot of our day-to-day interaction is with people. And, there's a lot of separations now, clearly, although I'm in a hotel room right now. If I was on site, I'd probably be wearing a mask talking to you. So just like that's sort of the first, I would call it a barrier, because it's hard to read people's expressions when half of their face is covered with a mask. It's also very hot out here right now in the Central Valley. So, it's starting to get into the hundreds. So just wearing a mask when you're pouring sweat has been different. And then you have to think about simple things like, passing each other in a hallway. How do you sort of both hug the outside walls? If you're waiting to get into a conference room that's at 50% capacity, where do you stand? When you're in the conference room, I mean, this particular client has done a great job with visual controls. So you need to sit at the seat that's marked with an X. So if I have one more person than I had planned on having, we now need to convert the meeting to a WebEx where they can call in, and then you have people in the room, not in the room. So I think for me, the word that comes to mind is just awkward. But at the same time, I think we have to be gracious and assume that people are trying to work this out too. And humor is a pretty good tool because it's sort of like you do this awkward shuffle sometimes. Like, am I supposed to stand on this side of the room or this
Right.
side, or what do we do? And I think just that humor and patience and grace where you can, especially traveling, just helps you get through some uncomfortable moments.
You've also mentioned that EY was pretty good at allowing you to determine whether or not this was the right decision for you to go. It
Sure.
wasn't mandated, it was people driven, as you mentioned. So I think that's really important. And we were talking about too, as we're working together at teams, whether you're a team leader or an individual, it's a very different way that we're interacting. Where before we'd go on site to a client, or we'd come together at a conference, we'd have a schedule, everyone's going to attend a dinner or a lunch, we're here, we're this, and that's different, right? So how does that
Very.
feel?
Yeah, it's actually, I joke a bit because I am a people person. I'm also an introvert, which is an interesting mix, but I do enjoy the team side of what we do. And you're right. I mean, it's somewhat lonely because you certainly cannot do team dinners. Even limited things like if you go out, there's a patio outside here of the hotel and you sit 8 feet apart. There's just a different dynamic now with everyone wearing masks and being careful around food. So I think what you have to start with is how do we make sure that people aren't isolated? Because we all have been isolated in some way for the last, let's say, 3 months. And that also people are getting the information at the same time. And we're not unintentionally leaving people out of the loop if we're not able to physically be together. So the way I do that is rather than have a meeting with one person, I make sure on a WebEx or a conference call that we have the team that is responsible for that present. So I don't have to go, point to point and have different conversations. And that can be a little uncomfortable because sometimes, in a team, you're talking some pretty challenging things, but you also, to me, it's worth the benefit of getting their ideas as well. So that's one point. The other thing I'd say is, even though I'm the team leader, I certainly don't have all the answers. This is something that I think from a principal perspective, we're all trying to do the right thing, but we also have to be okay with realizing that we're probably doing some things wrong based on the emerging science behind this. Because I remember even like week 2 or 3 of the crisis, EY was still talking about a partial office, people partially being in office that had essential roles. And, 2 weeks after that, sort of the rest of the science came out and we're like, that's probably not the best idea, So you sort of have to be graceful and go, we're all trying to do the right thing. We're trying to meet our clients' needs. But if people are personally uncomfortable with a certain situation, I think especially as a team leader, my job is to foster a climate where that diverse opinion can come out and that we consider it and think about how to do it. Because ultimately, we talk a lot in human capital about servant leadership. This is really the test of it, because if I don't have my people that feeling safe, healthy, like they're engaged, then what do I have? And it really takes some active listening skills that I could probably dust off, because my situation may be very different from your situation. And I think the only way you can stay at work, it's not just returning to work, but to me, it's staying at work, is making
Right.
sure those individual viewpoints, even though they may be unpopular to some, those need to come out, because that's the only way you can feel comfortable back in an office.
Right. It takes a lot of adjusting and understanding of
It really does.
this comfort level and
Right.
hearing in the media, which oftentimes it's changing from week to week or day to day of what is safe. So I think we're all just trying to make sense of it and trying to analyze what we feel is right, and and that can change based
Sure.
on what.
Right. And that's what makes it hard too, is because the science isn't solid yet, which also means the regulatory bodies like OSHA haven't clearly defined yet what
Mhm.
safe practices are, but beyond temperature checks and masks. I think that's even more important for a company to listen to their employees, because until there's a vaccine or something that scientifically would make us probably all feel safer. This is an emerging thing that we'll have to work through together about what makes me feel safe.
Right. And we talked also about managing under a crisis. And you personally had experienced this before, I believe, when you were volunteering with one of the hurricanes in Louisiana. Is that right?
I was, yep.
And so what practical advice or tips did you leverage from that and apply it to now?
Right. So I worked in a plant that went through Katrina. And, I think some of the reaps for me are just understanding that the initial reaction to most crises is shock, and you're just trying to get through it. But, sort of the emotional and the stress reaction to it can actually last for months, if not years. So I think it's really important, like for me, especially working at home or being back on the client site, is that you understand sort of your core hours where you're on, and then make sure that you have also some hours where you're off. Like for me, I'm a runner, so I make sure every night I'm able, once it cools down a little bit, to go for a run, because that's my way of sort of dealing with the day. Certainly making sure that, whatever your family situation, that you keep in contact with family or with friends, and you have that virtual game night or whatever it is. Like it's important to not feel trapped in a place. And I think the other thing too is speak up. If you have a better idea than I do, or any of us do, it's so much easier when there's something positive every day, even a small thing that you can do to change your situation, or in my case, change something at the client. Then, like you were saying, I don't personally find it very productive to just listen to endless cycles on the media, because there's not much I can do about that. But what I can do is something today to make myself feel safer. Something, I'm a goal-oriented person. What can I knock out today? Because otherwise, you can easily, and I myself have been overwhelmed by the crisis, and you have to go to, what can I control today? What can I do? And it takes some practice. I'm certainly not perfect at it.
Try to only control what you can control, and that's how you perceive and your emotions. And it is hard, but I think having the mindset and adjusting or thinking about it when you know that you have a trigger, or you start feeling that stress, you got to reset quickly and just be mindful of it.
Yeah, definitely. And also do something for someone else. Like for me, if I want to get out of my own situation, since I was, I believe, one of the first people to start traveling again, it's helped me just to help others, and who are going through some of the things I had to think about, 6 weeks ago, to help guide them through, well, here was at the time what the science said, so here's what I did about that. And it helps to help someone else rather than just sort of be in this circle of me. So that's a tip I would throw out there.
Yes. And what is it like to be on a plane right now and traveling again?
Yeah, so week one, so 2 weeks ago, so I come out like in 2 week cycles. At least Charlotte to San Francisco was pretty empty, but I would say over the last week, based on my situation and a few others who are traveling, the planes are crowded again, even where not every middle seat is empty. So I would just say to not be surprised. I would either call the airline or read their website, because it is hard to stay 6 feet apart on the plane, right? So even if the middle seats are empty, front and back, that's not 6 feet apart. So what I do think the airlines are getting right is they're being transparent about how they clean. They're having longer layovers between flights, which personally makes me feel comfortable, because, when they do a 10-minute change of a plane and board you, there's no way they're cleaning. Sorry. Sorry if I'm offending any airline people, but I never felt comfortable with that. So I think between requiring masks, and being transparent around the air filtration, I actually don't worry a lot about flying. Where I've been careful is hotel and rental car, because to me, those are more, I'll call them confined spaces, that probably have higher turnover of people. So I would say EY and the client, we've been really thoughtful around on a long-term project. Like I reserved a long-term stay property where I can have the same room throughout, which for me makes me feel comfortable because I know, I can clean it. I'm the only person in the space, and the same thing for a rental car. The company I deal with has a 15-point cleaning process. I know how they cleaned it. I cleaned it again. And so for me, my trigger is not the airplane, it's a hotel and car. But I will say there have certainly been a few people on the last flight I took, because it's a 5-hour flight, who were very uncomfortable with being so close to each other. And I will say the flight attendants did a nice job, listening and saying, well, this is how we're loading the planes. Maybe there's a way we can redistribute once we take off. But if you're really uncomfortable, quite honestly, maybe you should get off, and we'll try to rebook you on a lower capacity flight. So I think as much as possible, people are being respectful, but you just have to know that most of the planes are probably at least 2/3 full because of all the flights they've taken off flying.
Mm-hmm. That's good to know. Thanks for offering that insight there. And is there anything else that you'd like to talk about the framework? It's since you've shared with me the framework that UI has created, I've been seeing it on the commercials on TV a lot. So I was like, oh, okay, there you are.
Yeah, well, it's good that it's getting some pickup, because to me that means it's of use to our clients, because ultimately, we're not trying to commercialize the framework. It's more, what I appreciate about EY is our purpose is to build a better working world, and what that specifically means is, in this case, how do we help people responsibly go back to work? So in the framework, there's 2 gears. One gear is a transition gear, which is what you and I are talking, which is how do we physically go back to a space? How do we make sure we're each safe? I work, when I work in the office, I work in a downtown building in Charlotte that's 45 stories tall. So something as simple as making all the elevators express elevators, because they're very small, is an essential element for my own team to be able to go back to our office, which I haven't been to yet.
You're not going to be looking up the 45 flights of stairs to your
I would like to say yes to you, but no. Maybe down.
Your nightly running.
Yeah, right. I probably need the cross training, but that's a very simple example of where, if you think about this particular skyscraper, right? Like, it's not just getting up and down those floors, but we can't gather in the elevator lobby. We shouldn't be gathering in the security lobby before you badge in. Like, it will take some time to think through how to responsibly do all that. And by the way, that's not our building. We're a tenant in a building. So then you have to say, well, what are all the other companies in that building doing, right? What are their policies? Are they requiring their employees to wear a mask if we do get on the same elevator? Like all of that. So that's what we would call transition. And then I think the harder piece is transformation, because even though I am currently back on a project in an essential business, every day the client and I are rethinking how to transform the work. And it's not just being on site or off site, but is there a way that we should be doing the work differently, just to reduce the risk of COVID transmission during this time? Because even though you're back at work, I'm back at work, I would say there's still no medical solution to this. So I think, and I hope I'm wrong, but it feels like for the next 6 to 9 months, there may not be one. So how do we continue to think about how we transform work where business can still operate and survive, but it's just going to be in a really different way?
Mm-hmm. It sure is, and I think it's great that you have taken a position around safety and the emotional and the physical considerations that people need to think about, and figure out ways that we can interact in the workplace, and also understand what people's home lives are like, and what kind of safety or what kind of things that they have that are going to help them in case of the what ifs.
Well, that's right. And that's another example of transformation where I think there will be some work that never comes back to office,
Oh,
where
yeah.
it can be done remotely for a lot of different reasons. And for me, that's great. If it offers more work-life flexibility, um, I would say companies definitely need to think about, should work come back, or can, during the last 12 weeks, if it's been effective, why not do it? And I think one of the biggest barriers I saw to that kind of transformation is usually leaders themselves have probably not ever been in a situation like COVID, where they were forced to work from home, where they were forced to use technology. So it's really been an equalizer in terms of, we're all doing Zoom or GoToMeetings or whatever else. So I think that leadership mindset is often a barrier to transformation. This is a great time over the next few months to take advantage of that and say, how should we transform our companies based on the fact that we know we've been able to operate during a terrible crisis.
Right, and embrace our families at the same time, and
Right.
we're kind of adjusting to everything right now and trying to integrate both our work and our home and homeschooling for some that are still, their kids are still in school. Ours finished last week, which was kind of I think for a lot of us that had to help with the homeschooling, it's a
Sure.
relief that I'm not in school right now, because being able to do that and to do work was challenging. So I hopefully next year that they resume some type of going back to school, but we'll see what happens there. And
Right.
us in Hall Group, we've, I think it was really important for us. We have research that's ongoing week to week. We've been doing pulse surveys and capturing examples from companies like you of how you are reacting and how you're working with your clients and how you're transitioning remotely, and what kind of tools and procedure that you have to put into place. So it's a week by week, a day by
It
day.
really is. And we're glad to share. Like I said, we do a lot of gracious acts because we just feel like it's the right thing to do,
Right.
to help all of us figure this thing out. And yeah, there's a lot of jokes, from COVID. I think about my own family. I had two high schoolers upstairs on different computers trying to keep, SAT and ACT tests going, to my wife trying to do her job in one corner and me in another. But I think if we've been able to make it through all that, I would hope would bring that same creativity back to our own jobs, to your point, and think about, how flexible could we be based on everyone's different situations.
Agreed. Agreed. Well, Glenn, thank you so much. Thanks for joining me today and for sharing what you are experiencing and some examples of what EY has put into place to help your clients, to help your people. So, again, this is just an ongoing discussion of what to deal with and what we can all expect. We've never done research on a topic week by week as much as we have now. We
Right.
run any survey, do a series of interviews, put out a report, and then we're kind of on to the next topic. Now it's ongoing, so it's interesting.
Truly.
Well, stay safe, and I look forward to our next discussion. Thank you, Glenn.
You're welcome.